In 1893, a children's institution opened in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Its founding charter did not call it an orphanage. The document called it an industrial home instead. That word appeared in the founding documents of hundreds of institutions. It was printed on front doors across America, Ireland, and England. It sat in government inspection reports for over a century. Nobody questioned it during all those years of operation. Nobody asked the obvious question: industrial doing what, and for whom? I started pulling founding charters from institutional archives on both sides of the Atlantic. The language was remarkably consistent across countries and decades. The same phrase appeared in Dublin, London, Philadelphia, and Melbourne. Industrial school, industrial training home, industrial reformatory for children. These were not euphemisms invented later by embarrassed historians. These were the names the institutions chose for themselves at the moment of creation. And when I started mapping the physical layouts of these places, tracking down architectural plans, inspection diagrams, and insurance surveys, a pattern emerged. These were not single buildings housing vulnerable children. They were compounds. They were walled complexes with multiple structures connected by corridors and courtyards. The front building had the institution's name carved above the entrance. It had a reception hall where donors gathered for annual fundraising events. It had a dining room that inspectors could photograph and send to government offices. But behind it, connected by passages that did not appear on public-facing plans, stood a second building, sometimes a third. And those buildings had no name carved above any door. The front building told one story. The second building told the truth. In Limerick, Ireland, the Good Shepherd Institution operated from 1848 to 1990. The complex on that single plot of land consisted of a commercial laundry, an industrial school, a reformatory school for girls, an orphanage, a convent, and a church. Underground entrances and exits kept women working in the laundry separated from the children housed in the orphanage next door. When the building was later converted into an art college, an architect noted those tunnels. They had been filled in with concrete. There was, the architect told a researcher, no reason to retain them, no reason to retain the passages connecting children to a commercial operation. No reason to remember the architecture that made extraction invisible. Just pour concrete into the tunnels and call it renovation. No plaque was installed to mark what the tunnels once connected. In Dublin, the Artane Industrial School operated from 1870 to 1969. At its peak, it housed nearly 1,000 boys behind a walled perimeter. The institution described itself as self-sufficient with evident pride. The children made their own clothes and stitched their own shoes. They grew their own food and operated their own printing press. Nearly 1,000 children functioning as an unpaid workforce inside a walled compound. And the word used to describe this arrangement was not exploitation. It was self-sufficiency. The front building was the orphanage the public saw. The second building was a factory staffed entirely by children who had committed no crime beyond being born to parents too poor to keep them. This was not unique to Ireland. In Jerusalem, the Schneller Orphanage expanded by 1903 into 8 buildings surrounded by high stone walls with iron gates locked every night. The compound operated its own printing press, bakery, flour mill, laundry, carpentry shop, pottery factory, and brick kiln. In Pittsburgh, in Manchester, in Melbourne, the same model appeared with local variations but identical architecture. A presentable entrance for the public, an industrial operation behind the walls. Children moving between both buildings on schedules set by adults who answered to no parent. Across the Atlantic, the same blueprint appeared in different brick. By 1910, Chicago alone had more than 30 children's homes housing thousands. Most of those institutions kept between 200 and 900 children. The New York Juvenile Asylum, founded in 1851, divided each child's day in half. Half for classroom instruction, half for what the institution called the workshop. Boys made shoes. The institution sold at a profit of $4 to $6 per day. Girls were trained exclusively in domestic labor. The institution's own records described the boys' labor as generating revenue. The girls' training was described as making them useful and virtuous. Those are not my characterizations placed onto history with modern judgment. Those are the institution's own words, written into their annual reports. Now, the obvious objection. These were different times with different standards. Child labor was common across all classes, not just in institutions. Religious orders took in children who would otherwise have died on the streets. Some inspectors genuinely found conditions acceptable. The Ryan Report, Ireland's exhaustive government investigation into institutional child abuse, acknowledges that some facilities passed inspection. Some children received adequate food and shelter inside those walls. I do not dismiss any of that context. But satisfactory conditions in the front building do not explain what happened in the second one. A clean dining hall does not account for an attached commercial laundry generating revenue from children's labor. A passing inspection score does not address rooms the inspectors never entered. The financial architecture of these compounds reveals their actual purpose. In Ireland, industrial schools received government grants calculated per child housed. More children meant more money flowing into the institution each quarter. This created an incentive to fill beds and keep them full regardless of whether the children in them had living parents. The Magdalene Laundries, commercial washing operations attached to children's institutions, generated additional revenue. Girls who aged out of industrial schools often transferred directly into the laundries. They spent their entire adult lives there. The institutions fed each other in a closed loop. The orphanage supplied the laundry with workers. The laundry funded the orphanage with revenue. The children were the raw material circulating between both buildings. By 1898, 71 industrial schools operated in Ireland at peak capacity. The same religious congregations managed the orphanages, the reformatory schools, and the laundries. One historian described it as a massive, interlocking system carefully and painstakingly built up over a number of decades. The system was not accidental. It was engineered. In England, factory owners paid workhouses and orphanages between £2 and £5 per child delivered to their mills. George Courtaulds' silk mill paid £5 upon receiving a child, then another £5 after the child's first year of labour. The children signed contracts binding them until age 21. Adult male workers at the same mills earned over 7 shillings per week. Children under 11 received 1 shilling and 5 pence. The orphanage received the purchase price in full. The factory received 2 decades of discounted labour in return. The child received a contract they could not read, signed by the very people tasked with their protection. The American numbers tell the same story in different currency. The 1870 census found 1 out of every 8 children employed. By 1900, the rate had climbed to 1 in 5. In southern mill towns, the mill owner provided schooling, stores, and housing, but families routinely fell into debt to the company store. Children too young to work appeared in company records described not as dependents or minors. They were called an investment in the future, productive capacity of the mill. Not children, productive capacity. The language was never hidden. It was filed with government offices in public reports. And then there is the part of this research that nearly broke the project, not because the evidence was weak, because the evidence was documented so thoroughly in published medical papers and government reports that presenting it feels like stacking weight on a foundation already cracking. Orphanage children were used as medical test subjects, not in isolated incidents, across multiple countries and spanning multiple decades. In 1908, researchers in Philadelphia infected dozens of children with tuberculin at St. Vincent Orphanage. Some children suffered permanent blindness from the procedure. Others developed painful lesions and chronic eye inflammation. The following year, another researcher at a different Philadelphia orphanage deliberately infected 2 children with a skin virus. He then admitted in his own published paper that the disease mechanisms were already well understood before his experiment. He infected children to confirm what textbooks had already established. In Ireland, between 1930 and 1936, more than 2,000 children in religious-run homes received an experimental diphtheria vaccine manufactured by Burroughs Wellcome. No evidence exists that consent was ever sought from any parent. No records survive documenting adverse effects or deaths. Historian Michael Dwyer described his findings as just the tip of a very large and submerged iceberg. The trials involved children from at least 3 Dublin institutions. The results were published in prestigious medical journals. The trials themselves were never disclosed to the Irish public. In Australia, between 1945 and 1970, the Commonwealth Serum Laboratories tested vaccines on babies at 5 institutional homes. A government report concluded that consent was likely obtained only from staff, not from parents. In New York, between 1963 and 1966, researcher Saul Krugman infected mentally disabled children at Willowbrook with hepatitis. He fed them fecal extracts from infected patients, Parents were told they were signing vaccination consent forms. Children without parents had no advocates to question procedures. Children without advocates had no protection against researchers. Institutions housing unprotected children had exactly what medical science needed. They had a controlled population that could not refuse. The first documented experimentation on institutionalized children occurred in 1803 in Australia, when an assistant surgeon tested smallpox vaccine on orphans with the governor's written permission. The practice continued for over 160 years before anyone passed a regulation restricting it. I sat with this research for 3 weeks before writing a word, not because verification was lacking. Every claim I have shared is documented in published papers or government archives. The problem was structural. How do you place the tuberculin experiments in Philadelphia alongside the commercial laundry in Limerick? How do you set the shoe workshop in New York next to the vaccine trials in Dublin without equating a factory with a laboratory? They are not the same violation, but they operated on the same principle. Children without power were converted into resources, labor, revenue, data. The front building was where the conversion was justified. The second building was where it was carried out. And then there is the ground beneath the compounds, the part that was never meant to surface. In 2012, Catherine Corliss, a local historian in County Galway, published an article about the former St. Mary's Mother and Baby Home in Tuam. She had traced death certificates naming the institution as the place of death. She paid €4 per certificate. The total was €3,184 from her own savings. She found 796 children on those certificates. None had corresponding burial records. None were interred in any public cemetery in the town. In 2017, a government excavation confirmed human remains in a disused sewage structure on the grounds. The remains belonged to infants and toddlers. In December 2025, a second burial ground was discovered. It was 50 to 100 meters from the original site. There had been no surface marker, no memorial, no record of its existence. The Irish Prime Minister called the original site a chamber of horrors. The Bon Secours sisters, who operated the home, initially hired a public relations firm. The firm denied a mass grave existed. Catherine Corliss had already published the death certificates. She had paid for them herself because no institution, no government agency, and no religious order had ever requested them. 796 children died inside that compound over 36 years of operation, and she was the first person to ask for the paperwork. Across Ireland's mother and baby homes, approximately 9,000 children died between 1922 and 1998. That is 5 times the national average infant mortality rate for the same period. These deaths were not caused by poverty alone. They were concentrated inside institutions that received government funding specifically to prevent them. The mortality rate at Tuam alone was staggering. Nearly 1 in 4 children who entered that home did not survive to leave it. If your family passed through any institution like these, the building they entered was not the building where they spent their days. The name on the front door existed for inspectors and benefactors. The second building existed for the children. If you have ever traced your ancestry to a dead end at an institutional record, this is likely why. The records from the second building were the first documents destroyed when the doors finally closed. The Fisheries School in Baltimore, West Cork, had its records deliberately destroyed according to government investigators. Goldenbridge's records are incomplete. Artain's archives remain fragmentary after a century of selective preservation. Your ancestor's name may have been in a ledger that someone decided had no reason to be retained. The word that stays with me is not orphanage. It is the word they actually chose for themselves: industrial. For more than a century, that word appeared in charters and government legislation. It appeared in inspection reports filed with public offices. It appeared on the iron gates of walled compounds. Inside those compounds, children labored without wages in commercial operations that generated institutional revenue. They were tested without consent in experiments published in medical journals. They were buried without markers in ground that was never consecrated and never recorded. We read the word industrial and heard charity. We toured the front building and believed we had seen the whole institution. The architecture was honest the entire time. We chose to see only one building because the second one asked questions we were not prepared to answer. You have walked past buildings like these. They stand in your city converted into apartments, offices, and art colleges. Their walls still carry the faint outlines of institutional signage. Their courtyards are parking lots now. Their tunnels are filled with concrete. But the founding charters still sit in municipal archives with that word printed clearly on the first page. The excavation at Tuam is expected to take 2 years to complete. DNA has been collected from 30 families so far. Remains have already appeared in locations nobody anticipated, and Tuam is one compound, one site among hundreds that followed the same blueprint across Ireland, England, America, and Australia. Same walled perimeters, same presentable entrance halls, same unnamed structures behind them, same missing records, same sealed passages. How many compounds are sitting on ground nobody has examined? How many second buildings still stand with their original function scraped from the walls and paved over in the name of progress? The founding charters still exist. The word industrial is carved into stone lintels that have never been removed. The buildings told us what they were from the very beginning. The question is not what they said, it is why we decided for over a century not to listen.